Hi, welcome to this fourth session of the Dolby Atmos music webinar series. I'm Kerry Thomas and responsible for content and studio enablement at Dolby for music, and we take you through Dolby Atmos music specifications and why they're important, what they mean, and yeah, look forward to chatting with you about this. So this is part of the webinar series. Previous episodes can be seen on the GoToWebinar channel. Throughout the presentation, you'll see links to these websites via QR codes. If you point your cell phone camera at it, then that should take you to the relevant information. So as I was developing this this presentation, felt it was important to tell you why it's important to have these specifications, what they're controlling. And so in that case, it starts really at the consumer side. So the consumer needs to have a consistent experience and be able to get as close to your studio experience as possible. And that's really what the specifications are in place to ensure. Dolby enabling you to be as successful in this as possible. So let's start at the end and look our way back into where the music comes from. So distribution files. So these file formats different depending on whether it's going to headphone-based playback or speaker-based playback, and they look a bit like this. So the DD plus jock, so the Dolby Digital codec, is powering the speaker-based playback. That's actually backwards compatible to Dolby Digital in the late 90s, and so all of the hundreds of millions of devices that have been released with Dolby technology since then are capable of playing back this file in some form. Doesn't contain the binaural metadata, so it is really only for speaker-based playback, and it's currently what's powering the Amazon Music HD Unlimited tier with Dolby Atmos Music. On the headphone side of things, we have the AC4 IMS codec we talked a little bit about last week. That has the binaural metadata controls and is what's going out to Tidal for their Android-based playback. So those two files or two bit streams get generated here on the right-hand side. So that's what's going to the consumer. But before that, there sits a cloud encoder, and the ADM file that gets created out of the Dolby Atmos renderer. That cloud encoder is actually hosting what's called the Dolby encoding engine. So the Dolby encoding engine is our enterprise level encoder that's designed for generating all kinds of Dolby formats for the marketplace. But for music, what that's doing is taking an ADM B wave, we'll talk about again in a little bit, and taking all the metadata out of that and measuring the loudness of the track. It's then setting that as a parameter in the DD plus jock bit stream, known as dial norm, and doing a similar encode for AC4. Then wraps those bit streams as an MP4 and delivers out into the marketplace. Get some kickback on this from music engineers, but it's not as scary as it sounds. So dial norm is basically just static metadata that is describing the loudness of the content. So it's referred to as dial norm because, as I said, the technology is backwards compatible to the late 90s, where the core anchor elements were really based around the dialogue of a particular piece of content. So if you just think about this as a sort of automatic volume control that's enabled in the decoder, what we're doing with this dial norm value is actually setting the average loudness level for the entire track, and it really has nothing to do with dialogue anymore. It's just a useful place to store that data. So Dolby Atmos music uses what's known as integrated loudness. So in various different formats, you can have short-term loudness, you can dialogue weight that, you can do all kinds of measurements for how loud a track is. Dolby Atmos music uses the integrated loudness across the entire piece of content, so from track start to track end. And it's doing that using a measurement known as BS 1770-4. Promise you this gets more and more exciting the further we go down the line. So target for music to aim for is -18 LKFS, and we've got some wiggle room in there, so ±2 loudness units. But if you can get to that sort of -18 integrated measurement, then you'll be in a good spot to ensure that your content plays back over speakers, over headphones, and it is approximately equivalent to -15 LKFS for the binaural or the stereo. That -15 is going to be important in a few moments, so remember it. So loudness measurement is it's all measured from a 5.1 re-render. So because this is object-based audio and flexible rendering to as many speakers as you might have in a particular environment, measuring off the whole Atmos mix is not something that is particularly relevant in that way. So the 5.1 re-render contains all of the object data in the sort of correct locations and sort of flattened down into a channel-based measurement that can be calculated. The human ear does not perceive all frequencies at equal amplitude. So this has been known for quite some time. Coming up on 100 years ago, or certainly 90 years ago, this work was started by Fletcher Munson and further elaborated on in the 50s by Robinson Dadson. But measuring the perceived loudness of a track is important because of this inability for the human ear to perceive all frequencies at equal amplitude. So the LKFS value is deemed as then being equal loudness but human weighted. So taking that human element into account. The tool that we have at the top of this slide is Nugent Audio's VisLM meter, widely used in the industry, but in the latest version of the renderer, we actually included that loudness measurement in the renderer itself. So the setting there that's highlighted is the measurement that we're looking for to be -18, and so the doesn't have a blue box around it in the renderer. That's purely for graphical support of this, but it's doing that loudness measurement on that 5.1 re-render and ensuring that content is of a consistent level, or we say a usable level. So loud is better, right? Upper, as you push the fader up, it sounds and feels better. Well, that's probably true in certain circumstances, but largely in the music industry, that's been fought against for quite some time. So dynamic range day exists because of this sort of fight back against what was known as the loudness wars. So since digital came in, people have been trying to get their track to sound louder than the previous track, and to using all kinds of tricks to make that possible. Eventually getting to this place where recordings were crushed in such a way that it was no longer enjoyable. So some mastering engineers, Ian Shepherd out of the UK, has been sort of spearheading this for a good number of years now, introduced Dynamic Range Day to try and get dynamic range back into music. And that's been adopted then by the streaming platforms, who have specified their own loudness targets for stereo music, and doing so to allow greater headroom and more dynamic range available into those tracks. So that -15 measurement that we looked at earlier, after the 5.1 is measured and equated to stereo or to binaural, is right in line with, we'll see, Tidal and Spotify at -15 LUFS and Apple Music -16. The only outlier there being YouTube, who are louder, but also generating a different type of content. So not necessarily music focused, but yeah, streaming to the services. So all of that processing is happening, as I mentioned, in the cloud encoder. Now, there are facilities to do this on a sort of on-prem version. So if you want to build that encode farm, Dolby Encoding Engine is a platform you can buy from Dolby. I don't have pricing information readily available, but it is there. By keeping this encoding in the cloud, it enables the labels, the streaming services, everybody to kind of control what this experience is. Updates are pushed out much faster. So well worth engaging upon. But what's the missing piece in this? You've been paying attention? That's right, it's the ADM B-Wave. So that ADM B-Wave is a powerful format. So when immersive audio started in its current forms, obviously Dolby had their format of files that were being created. DTS, Fraunhofer, they all had their different formats that were being pushed out into the marketplace. And the fear was that these, a format would become redundant or not available anymore to utilize that data. So the Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers and International Telecommunications Union got together and came up with this extension to the broadcast wave file format known as the audio definition model broadcast wave. So frankly, ADM B-Wave's easier to say. And it's officially put out as this ITU RBS 2076 specification. So being an industry adopted format, it's useful for a wide variety of things. First off, it's been adopted by OTT providers. So those folks like Netflix, Apple TV, Amazon for Amazon Prime, have all adopted this ADM as the import mechanism for their deliveries for their streaming services. It's basically PCM data, so it's 48K 24-bit wave data plus this XML data metadata chunk. So it sits in the header, very similar to the iXML chunks that exist for production recording. But in this instance, it's dealing with the Dolby Atmos metadata. And it can be used for interchange as well. So not only for the final delivery of your master file, but also if you're sending your file from production suite setup into Nova Scotia with a studio enabled for Dolby Atmos, you can send them this ADM file that then they can import into Pro Tools version 12.8 or above, or Nuendo 10, and get all of that pan data as well as the underlying audio channels back out into a format that they can then work with. Very useful for a lot of reasons. So we've got the DD+ JOC, the AC4 that's coming out of the cloud encoder, that's doing all of that measurement and translation. The ADM file that's being passed into that cloud encoder, and then this DAMF file over on the other side of the presentation here. So Dolby Atmos master file is what that DAMF stands for. And so let's take a look at what that actually is. So 4 files are represented within this Dolby Atmos master file, or master file set, as it's sometimes referred to. So first is a .atmos file. This is a text file, manifest file, which directs the systems that are using it to the other files in the file set. Those files are a .atmos.audio, which contains a channel for each bed channel, so that 712 bed channel, plus each metadata source. Now, I refer to it as metadata source because it might be that you've left your panner in send mode, even though there's no audio on that particular channel. The Atmos.audio file will have a channel just of complete silence stored in there. So, I potentially advise you to think carefully about what panners you're leaving open in that regard. The .atmos.metadata contains all of the control data for each object. So if object 121 has a pan move that goes front left to back right, this metadata file will store all of the points along that trajectory in XYZ coordinates, and define how that's going to render out the audio file associated with it from the .atmos.audio. And then the last file is a .atmos.dbmd. So this is encoder control parameters that we can definitely go into more depth in, but largely you should ignore it for right now. So why have 2 file formats? Well, the DAMF file is the native file format for Dolby Atmos renderer. So it's what we have most control over in terms of what the functionality that comes from the door into the creation process. We have the control over that. It can be 48 or 96K. So if you've got a higher sample rate that you want to support, then you can pop that into the Dolby Atmos master file, and then converts out to ADM B-Wave for delivery. So it's a flexible file format for us, and something that is also then enabling you to get out into the distribution pipeline. So to summarize all in one place here, what the various formats look like. So we've got our master file formats, which are the DAMF, so the Dolby Atmos master file, which is a core audio format, Dolby proprietary, and it can be at 48 or 96K. Then the ADM B-Wave, which is based around PCM data. It's the standard in the industry, and again, operates at 48K. Distribution files, recap, for speaker-based playback, that's Dolby Digital plus JOC, and is contained in an MP4 container. Doesn't contain the binaural metadata, but is useful, goes out to Amazon Music HD. In the marketplace, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, they're all using this DD plus JOC stream as well for distribution of content with picture. And then AC4 IMS for headphone-based playback, so decoding in the Android devices, and being supported by Tidal on their hi-fi tier for Dolby Atmos music. So hopefully that's cleared up some of the acronyms and things that we use a lot of in talking about Dolby technologies. I mentioned the specifications. This is what the session is all about. I've actually provided them as a PDF that you can use this QR code down here to get a download of that PDF. But essentially, this is a summary of what's in there. So 714 speaker layout is what we recommend the mixers be listened to at a minimum. So yes, you can have more speakers in a room, you can have less speakers in a room, but we do recommend listening and monitoring in a room that has at least 714. Binaural render modes should be set for all channels. So if you're creating in headphones, you're probably in a good place to start setting those binaural render modes. Recommend that you do create that. It has incredible value downstream. But I wanted to talk about some of the oddities on this delivery spec and why they're there. So you'll notice 24 frames per second time code. But we're in music world, so why is that relevant? Well, music's not just going out to the streaming platforms associated with music only, so Amazon and Tidal. If you didn't see it, I recommend checking it out. There's the visual album of Pearl Jam's Gigaton that just came out on Apple TV Plus. That's the album married to some picture content, and so having this standardized this timecode preference, 24 frames is the most compatible frame rate that is available. So in order to go to a cinema for DCPs, that's 24 frames. In order to get out to OTT, it can be 24 frames. More often than not, 23.976. So it's a minor modification to the file for that. Whereas if you were to create it 25 frames per second, clearly I'm British, have a history of PAL in my world, then you're going to be dealing with 4% pull up and pull down, which is going to have a significant timbre change to your music. So 24 gets us into that safety net. So that's why I'm pushing for that. Minus 18 LKFS for the loudness target. Again, this is good information for and good translation to the stereo world that exists. So there we go. So let's take a look at what that export from the renderer looks like. So once you've created your master file, go to the File menu and Export Audio. You can set manually the inputs and outputs, or in and out points. So trimming to 1 second before the master file or before the song starts can be done in this way, and export right up to the end of a track. So here I'm just setting some arbitrary in and out points. and then the renderer exports that .atmos file into an ADM B-Wave ready for sending to your streaming service. If you've got a master file that comes in, you want to check that you're to spec. Again, you can do this in offline mode. So import that ADM B-Wave, and then in the window menu, we have this option to analyze the loudness of the track, and then give you a nice report about whether you hit spec and what you might want to look at changing. So very useful functionality built into the renderer for this distribution chain. Cool. So one of the things that I forgot to add to my earlier presentation, so you're getting this hot off the press, brand new. Next week, we're going to be holding some virtual sessions in place of what was going to happen at South by Southwest before we all got told to stay at home. So a couple of sessions that are going on, first being a virtual panel. So at 11 a.m. Pacific, around about now on Tuesday, then this session will be going live. So Tim Pride, who leads the Director of Music at Dolby, will be leading a panel discussion with some industry folk. So Samuel Lindley, who we heard from in the binaural session last week, we'll be talking about the evolving music creation process and experience. Leah Chisholm, who's a DJ and producer, will be talking about her experience. So Leah, as an artist, LP Giobi, was part of the team that was doing DJ sets at I think Soundbar was in Chicago was her last one, and Karma Orga, who owns a studio here in LA called Studio One, and he will be presenting his experiences of creating in Dolby Atmos music, and then that's followed at 2:30 Pacific time, so about 3.5 hours from now, on Tuesday, by myself and Nick Reeves from Capitol Studios. And we'll be looking at some of the techniques that Nick has developed over the course of the last 2.5 years from working in Dolby Atmos at Capitol Studio C. So how he's learned to use reverbs and compression and EQs and all of those sort of things, plus also some of the albums that he's worked on. Nick was the engineer that did some of the work for the Pearl Jam album, as well as Coldplay, and various other album releases. So we'll talk through some of those functionalities and tips and tricks that he's learned. And if you're thirsting for more information, we have the series here from the Masters, and let's take a look at the trailer for that series right here. So stand by. There we go. Now you can probably hear me. So a lot more in-depth sessions with Steve and George. Greg Penny's session is also available, and some brilliant insights into what they've learned about Dolby Atmos and how they've found it best to use the system and what their experience is. So highly recommend that. Future episodes with Bruce Botnick, Dave Hampton, Chris Baseford, Al Schmidt, Nico Bolas, and many others as well. So definitely worth checking that video series out. And then since the last go round of this webinar series, we've focused on enabling people to get started at home. So this series of videos was put together by the product team. So Todd Mackinnon and his team, covering a step-by-step of everything that's needed to get your setup working at home with Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, Nuendo, how to connect to the renderer, what you're going to need. So a real useful package of videos. Highly recommend taking a look at them, even if you are experienced with what Dolby Atmos music can be in your environment. So again, this QR code will take you direct to the folder that looks a bit like that. Cool. So let's take your questions. Just want to highlight again, those quick start videos are available in this link right here. Music specifications download is available, and various other things that you might want to make use of. So I'm going to open up the floor here for questions, and let me know what I haven't answered. Give a couple of moments to get that train running. Okay, so one question here about the 5.1 re-renders. So this is a fairly established workflow right now. So with the loud recommendations for the streaming services, the workflow that was designed is by taking this re-render and putting that out into a loudness meter to monitor what the overall intent of the Atmos mix is. So inside of the DD Plus, what's actually happening there is a 5.1 core is representing the audio data. So we're really measuring what that is. That contains all of the pan data decisions that have been made, rendered down into a channel base, position data, the size information. So the 5.1 re-render is a useful package that takes all of the data about the Atmos mix and puts it into this single point that is easily measurable. It's equivalent really to measuring the entire Atmos mix with all of the split out channels and objects, but significantly lower overhead in terms of the processing power, and much more consistent in terms of what's going out into the world. So that's why 5.1 is used there. How can I do this without being a label? So one thing I forgot to mention, and thank you for asking the question. So in the upcoming months, Avid have committed to adding Dolby Atmos support to their Avid Play infrastructure. So Avid Play is a subscription package that you can put into your Avid Link platform. So Avid Link is an application that sits on Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, pretty much anything that you can run a program on, and allows you to interact with the community, so forums and things like that. They also have this functionality called Avid Play, and And Avid Play is designed to, in the stereo world, get your stereo track out into as many digital platforms as possible. And Avid have decided to implement this Dolby Atmos into that distribution mechanism as well. So in the coming months, we'll be able to share more about this, but you'll take your ADM file from the renderer, upload that into the Avid Play system, and they are also in the background using this cloud encoder Dolby encoding engine to do those AC4 and DD+ jock encodes that then they enable the distribution into Amazon Music HD Unlimited or into Tidal. So this should enable the content owners, you with your independent artists, to create music in Dolby Atmos and get that distributed out into streaming services. Avid take no part of the royalties for that, so it's a direct link between you as an artist and the streaming service. The only cost is in what subscription model you're wanting to have for your music. So still being worked out on that side, but from what I've seen, it's all very, very reasonable. So excited about that. So hopefully that answers your question. So just scrolling through the list here. So production suite and mastering suite. Do you need the mastering suite to deliver a file? No. So you can use the production suite or the mastering suite to create this content. The age-old adage of if it sounds right, it is right holds true here. So while the mastering suite has a lot of flexibility in terms of getting the power needed to not worry about what you're putting into the system, the functionality of creating a master is also in the production suite. So in next week's session or in the Studio to the World session from previous, you'll see that I'm creating that master file on a single laptop that's running Logic Pro, sending audio into Pro Tools, sending metadata direct to the renderer and into Pro Tools, and then creating a master file on a production suite using nothing more than headphones on my laptop. So that functionality is just enabling you to then in the mastering suite offset that processing power, the disk I/O power that's needed. But if you're using production suite, you can create your master file. You can do all the loudness checks. You can render that out to ADM B-Wave and do everything that you need to do. The only limit is then on the CPU and the disk I/O power of the system. So if you're getting up to 100 channels of audio that you're trying to record into the renderer, you may start to see those disk I/O limitations cropping up, and the CPU for all of the processing on those channels may be adding up. So offsetting that into a second system is valuable. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, you can certainly get started with using this on headphones. As I mentioned, you can do it all in the box with nothing more than a pair of headphones. We do recommend listening over a speaker system, so that 714 recommendation in the specifications. Obviously, in this world, we may not have a studio environment to listen to those tracks on, but I'd encourage you to explore what that MP4 functionality in the renderer adds to the process as well. So I didn't mention it in this session, but one of the things you can do after you've created your master file, in the same way that you can export an ADM, is actually export an MP4, which has that DD+ jock bit stream in it. So it's 768 kilobits per second. If you select the music mode on that export, it's going to do the same integrated loudness measurement that is happening for the music tracks in the clouds. But what that enables you to do then is to take it on a USB stick, exFAT formatted USB stick, plug it into a television set that's Dolby enabled, Dolby Atmos enabled, plug it into a home theater system that's Dolby Atmos enabled, soundbar, and to experience what that sounds like over the home theater systems. It should be pretty captivating and pretty close to what is going to happen in the real world when played back. So if you don't have a 714 setup in your home, in your studio right now, take a look at some of the consumer options and see about monitoring your tracks on those. How can we downmix a 5.1 or 7.1 into stereo? So I'm assuming you're talking about Dolby Atmos and the 5.1, 7.1 re-renders into stereo. The options are also there to do that directly. So you can set up a stereo re-render path, and you can then have that. You have some trim controls that are available. So if you want to make different decisions or trim the surrounds overhead slightly differently for the stereo, you can make those decisions in metadata. That functionality was increased in the production suite in 3.4, so it's even more powerful than it was previously. So one thing I recommend is monitoring that stereo. So when you set up the Atmos renderer, it defaults into 7.1.4 speaker layout, or physical as it's defined. In the top left of the renderer, you'll find a monitoring layout switch, which the default options are 7.1, 5.1, and stereo, or 2.0 as it's labeled. And if you switch to 2.0, you'll be listening to the effect of all of those down mixes. So you can really get to this point where if you flick into that mode, you're listening to stereo, and you can make the decisions about the spatial information in that world as well, so that you can get even further down the line to this one mix delivery platform. So you can have your binaural, your stereo, your 5.1, your 7.1, and your full Atmos coming out of this single master file with all of the control set that's in there for trim functionality. So a lot of the functions that I described are then added into that DBMD, so Dolby metadata file, part of the .atmos package, and that's what's then going to control what the encoder is doing, but also what you're hearing in those speaker-based playbacks in the renderer. So pretty powerful functionality. Any more for any more? No? Okay. Well, just want to remind you that these sessions, they've all been recorded. So if you're playing catch up on these, then feel free to go to stage channel there, linked at the bottom. Scan that QR code, and it's going to take you right there. And join me next week for Dolby Music from your studio to the world. And we'll talk in more depth, and hopefully I'll figure out how you can actually monitor those in a little more than the mono that GoToWebinar crashes down into. So that's my homework this week, and maybe that I just send out some downloads of the videos beforehand. So watch your email and watch the space. But thank you for joining today. I hope that it's been informative, and yeah, look forward to. How can I get the previous sessions? They're all recorded on this Go to Stage link here. So if you're able to stream those, I think there's even a download option if you want to watch offline. But a lot of good resources in there, I think. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Music Studios team at dolby.com gets to my team, and yeah, look forward to answering your questions and hearing what you guys come up with. So thanks for joining, and enjoy the 10 minutes I get to give you back. All right, speak soon.